A black man in a tailored suit walked into a grand marble-floored bank, his stride calm, his presence undeniable. Yet, instead of respect, he was greeted with smirks, side eyes, and the cold condescension of a manager who believed he didn't belong. The man asked for service, but the manager waved him off, treating him like an intruder in his own lobby. What no one realized was that this customer wasn't just here to make a deposit. He was the CEO of the very bank they worked for, and every second of disrespect was pushing the arrogant manager closer to a downfall that would play out in front of the entire staff. The man's name was Marcus Hale, a figure who had risen from modest beginnings to become one of the most respected leaders in the financial world. His childhood was marked by scarcity. He grew up in a neighborhood where opportunity rarely knocked, and banks were places people feared rather than trusted. Determined to change that, Marcus studied relentlessly, balancing odd jobs while earning scholarships that carried him through college and into the world of finance. His vision was simple but powerful: create banks that served everyone fairly, regardless of skin color, background, or income. Over the years, his brilliance and integrity earned him not only wealth, but also the title of CEO of Hale National Bank, a rapidly growing institution with branches across the country. Despite his position, Marcus never lost touch with his roots. He often visited his branches unannounced, preferring to see how staff treated everyday customers without the veil of staged formality. It was his way of ensuring his vision lived beyond polished mission statements. On one quiet morning, dressed sharply but without the entourage or fanfare that usually accompanied high-profile executives, Marcus entered one of the bank's flagship locations downtown. The branch itself was a monument to wealth: gleaming glass walls, marble floors, and chandeliers that dripped elegance. But beneath the luxury, Marcus was more interested in observing the culture. Would customers be greeted with warmth? Would staff show the same respect to a construction worker depositing his weekly wages as they did to a millionaire investor? That day, however, Marcus was about to experience firsthand what too many of his customers already knew. Bias still lived in the very spaces that claimed to represent equality. The manager on duty, a man named Richard, saw Marcus enter and immediately dismissed him as someone unworthy of priority. He didn't recognize the CEO, and worse, he didn't care to look beyond appearances. What Richard didn't realize was that his every word, every sneer, was being silently catalogued by the very man who held his future in his hands. Marcus approached the counter with quiet confidence, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He carried himself with the ease of someone used to boardrooms and decision-making. Yet he kept his tone humble when he asked about accessing an account. The teller, a young woman, gave him a polite but uneasy glance before directing him toward the branch manager. Marcus thanked her and walked over, his presence calm, measured. Richard, the manager, stood behind his sleek glass desk, adjusting his tie as if preparing for an important meeting. But the moment his eyes landed on Marcus, his demeanor shifted. The polite professionalism he wore like armor cracked, revealing something sharper: disdain. Richard didn't bother to mask his skepticism as he sized Marcus up. To him, the man standing in front of him was out of place, an outsider in a world built for privilege. Marcus explained that he needed assistance with a large transaction. Richard's smirk widened, his tone dripping with mock courtesy. He questioned Marcus's intentions, doubted his credibility, and suggested he might be better off at another branch across town. The words weren't outright hostile, but the implication was clear: you don't belong here. Other staff members noticed the exchange, their eyes darting nervously between the two men. A few customers waiting nearby shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Yet no one spoke up. Richard leaned on his authority, letting each dismissive gesture grow heavier, refusing to look Marcus directly in the eye, shuffling paperwork as if his time were too valuable to waste, sighing when Marcus calmly clarified his request. For Marcus, this wasn't unfamiliar. He'd endured prejudice before, at job interviews where his resume was doubted, in business meetings where his ideas were stolen, and on streets where his success was met with suspicion. But here, in his own bank, the sting cut deeper. This wasn't just about personal disrespect. It was about the culture he had vowed to dismantle. Still, Marcus remained composed. He didn't raise his voice or reveal who he was. Instead, he watched. Every word Richard said, every dismissive gesture, every smirk, it all revealed the very mindset Marcus had built his career fighting against. The arrogance of the manager wasn't just about him. It was about every customer who had likely been made to feel small within those walls. The injustice escalated when Richard, with a performative chuckle, implied Marcus might not even have the funds he claimed to. He spoke loudly enough for others to hear, feeding into stereotypes that had long haunted black professionals. A few customers lowered their eyes, uncomfortable with the spectacle. Marcus's calm stare never wavered, though inside he measured the weight of every insult against the responsibility he carried as a leader. Behind the scenes, whispers began among the staff. Some employees recognized Marcus from internal newsletters or leadership meetings. They weren't entirely sure, but doubt flickered in their eyes. Could this man really be the Marcus Hale, the CEO himself? Yet they stayed silent, unsure whether to step in or let the confrontation unfold. Richard, oblivious, doubled down. He called over a security guard, insinuating that Marcus's presence was disruptive. That was the breaking point. Gasps rippled through the lobby as Richard raised his hand, motioning toward the exit, effectively ordering the CEO of the bank to leave his own building. Marcus didn't resist. He simply stood tall, his eyes locking onto Richard's with a quiet intensity that sent an unspoken message. You're digging your own grave. The staff and customers held their breath, sensing the moment was far from over. What Richard believed was a display of power was, in truth, the setup for his very public downfall. The lobby of the bank was tense, silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant clicking of keyboards. Richard stood tall, believing he had restored order by summoning security. The guard, hesitant, glanced between Marcus and the manager, unsure how to proceed. Customers craned their necks, watching the scene unfold, their curiosity now charged with anticipation. Marcus didn't flinch. With measured calm, he reached into his leather portfolio. He withdrew a sleek black folder embossed with gold lettering, the unmistakable crest of Hale National Bank. He laid it gently on Richard's desk, the gesture so deliberate it silenced even the whispers. Slowly, he slid out a document, the kind stamped with authority and sealed with weight. Richard frowned, irritation giving way to confusion. As his eyes skimmed the paper, the color drained from his face. Across the top, in bold print, was the signature that had guided the bank's growth for years. Marcus Hale, Chief Executive Officer. The silence was shattered. Gasps rippled across the lobby. A teller dropped her pen. The security guard stiffened, his hand frozen mid-motion. Customers exchanged stunned looks, some covering their mouths in disbelief. Marcus, The man Richard had belittled and dismissed was not only a customer, he was the owner, the leader, the man whose name graced every cornerstone of the bank. Richard's mouth opened, searching for words, but none came. The arrogance that had fueled his authority only minutes earlier crumbled, replaced by a desperate, stammering fear. He tried to explain, to mask his behavior as a misunderstanding. Still, the weight of the truth pressed down harder with every second. His own staff now looked at him differently, not with respect, but with shame. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm, steady gaze cut deeper than anger ever could. With a simple nod, he turned to the security guard and then to the stunned employees. His words were few but final. Richard was relieved of his duties, effective immediately. The moment was irreversible. Richard, once confident in his untouchable position, stood exposed before the very people he had led. His downfall wasn't hidden in a back office or buried in paperwork. It unfolded publicly, a sharp reminder that respect is not a courtesy granted by status, but a requirement owed to every human being. The echo of Richard's dismissal lingered in the air long after he was escorted out of the branch. Employees who had once looked to him with deference now shifted uncomfortably, their eyes filled with regret. Customers, some still clutching their forms and checkbooks, whispered to one another about what they had just witnessed. The truth was undeniable. The mask of authority had been ripped away, and the ugly reality of bias had been exposed in the most public way possible. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a rebuke, a living reminder of why he had built this institution in the first place. He addressed the staff briefly, not as a scolding executive, but as a leader reminding them of their responsibility to treat every person who walked through those doors with dignity. He spoke of fairness, of empathy, of the values that had guided Hale National Bank from the ground up. His words weren't long, but they carried weight. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond the branch. Customers shared their shock on social media, praising Marcus for his composure and condemning the prejudice they had seen firsthand. Employees reflected deeply. Some moved to tears in private conversations about how they had allowed silence to enable injustice. Training sessions were revamped, policies were tightened, and a culture shift began to take root. Richard's name faded quickly, but the lesson he left behind would echo for years. For Marcus, the incident was not just about his own dignity. It was about every customer who had ever been told they didn't belong, every person whose worth had been measured against stereotypes instead of character. He knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but this moment was proof that accountability was possible. As he left the branch that day, the marble floors gleaming beneath his steps, Marcus carried with him not anger, but resolve. His story asked, a question that hung in the air for everyone who heard it. How many moments like this go unseen? And what would the world look like if we all chose to confront them instead of staying silent?